I'm Michael James, and I'm here with Emilio Davis, and we're bringing you another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. We're out of Chicago. Our home base is WLUW 88.7 or WLUW.org. We are bringing you what we would call number 118 of the Zoom presentations of this show that have been made during the time of the pandemic. We do have an opportunity soon to go back in the studio, and I'm not sure how we'll handle it because this Zoom really lets us talk to people anywhere in the country or the world. Anyhow, today we've got the writer, the novelist, the professor, Shawn Shiflett coming on. He's going to talk about his books and his writing, and we're going to start off with one of our friends, Andrea Rayla, who brought to our attention a situation with a woman named Wanda Carter, who is the subject of what they call zombie foreclosures. And we'll get to that in a little bit. I'd like to share a good thing or two that happened. I actually started teaching at DePaul this week, so I have 29 new students that I want to get to know. Last week, a shout out to the Zine Mercado for a wonderful event they had in Logan Square that I participated in and had a wonderful time. And I came across a magazine called Grist. It's an American nonprofit online magazine founded in 1999 that publishes environmental news and commentary. And what caught my attention was, I think I saw it somewhere else, but they reported that a Dutch city near Amsterdam is introducing the first of its kind ban on meat advertising. In an effort to address the climate crisis, authorities in the city of Haarlem, Haarlem, approved the first ban on meat advertising in public spaces. And a family note, this was a lot of things going on today, recording on the 9th. I want to wish a happy birthday to my wonderful sister, Melody James. Happy birthday to my late brother, Jim Arden. And on Thursday to my daughter, Koya Paz. And on the 8th also was my wedding anniversary. So a lot of action in these 3 days. Okay, moving along. As you know, we've been talking a lot about the midterms coming up, the crisis in democracy, the opportunity we have to win some seats and fend off the semi-fascist or real fascist underbelly that has been rising in our country. And we're going to cover that more next week. But if you're not registered to vote, or if you have time to work on some elections with phone calls, door knocking, et cetera, go for it. It would be real important. Moving over to the health front, updated COVID boosters are now available. Monkeypox is slowing, but lengthy quarantine periods are leaving working people in some financial ruin, as the monkeypox often is not covered with pay. On some sad notes, beyond the Queen passing away at the age of 96, a real good friend, Pat Gleason, who many of you who listen to the show know from her longtime work with Salcedo Press, as well as her work around Cuba, has passed away, and we'll do a little bit more on Pat in weeks to come. And we're so sorry to learn of this. She was really a wonderful woman, a wonderful person, and we're going to miss her. Also, we reported a few weeks back that the reporter, the writer David Moberg from In These Times and other places has passed away, and there will be later on today, if you're watching the show, or listening to the show on WLUW or seeing it by a stream on Saturday morning. Later in the day, David Moberg Memorial will be held at the Chicago Teachers Union Hall, 1901 West Carroll, and that will be at 3:00. On the environment, Emilio helped me out adding some of these, and he let us know that the world's first 100% hydrogen-powered trains are now running regional service in Germany to replace diesel. The Guardian newspaper reports today, that would be Friday, that to report on how close Ginny Thomas's links to the anti-abortion groups who lobbied to overturn Roe are. And remember that she is the wife of Clarence Thomas, one of the more conservative among a group of conservative members of the United States Supreme Court. On the labor front, Biden gave a Labor Day speech and he called for the expansion of labor unions. That's great to hear from a president. It hasn't happened in my time. Also, on an international front, President Biden is now in talks to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal. On the sports front, beyond the Bears, all the hype about a potential new stadium in Arlington Heights with a wonderful racetrack still stands. We've heard that Lori Lightfoot, our mayor, has hinted at bringing in a second team. We'll see how that all plays out. In the baseball world, the White Sox are on a good run. They have an easy schedule. That's, I mean, they'll win for the next couple of days, while the two teams, either tied or in front of the Sox, are playing each other. So watch that one. And all of you who have been following the Women's National Basketball Association and hoping for the Sky to repeat, the Sky has fallen. And the Sky lost last night. It was quite remarkable that the Suns from Connecticut were down by 8 points with probably 3.5 minutes left, and they won by 18 points. So I think they were down by 9. That's too bad, but the Sky gave us a good run. On the global and around the world front, you've all heard about the stabbings in Saskatchewan, and that was really an outrageous story and very sad, and much remains to be learned from that. Here in Chicago, there is some talk and rumors that Chuy Garcia is mulling over another campaign for mayor. That's an interesting one, and that would certainly shake it up a little bit. On the weed front, the word is that Biden and Fetterman, who is the candidate for senator in Pennsylvania, have been discussing changes of marijuana's status as a controlled substance while they had a meeting on Labor Day. Here in Rogers Park, later today, on Saturday, I'm talking now, there will be a rally and a petition signing for the current Alderwoman Maria Hadden that will be held in right there south of the old Heartland Cafe, where the old No Exit was. There will be a rally today at 11 o'clock. Today, meaning tomorrow from when we're recording. We're going to take a little musical break. Once again, Emilio is picking the tunes, and we'll be right back with our first guest. So stay tuned here on the left end of your dial for the Live from the Heartland show. We're back with more Live from the Heartland. I'm Michael James here with Emilio Davis, and welcome to our first segment for the week of September 10th. A friend of ours, Mark Brown, who has covered a story recently about zombie foreclosures, and another friend, Andrea Rayla, who is a tax advocate, got a hold of us and told us about it and said, you should do something on the show about it. And we like to have, when our listeners, our viewers, our friends come forward and suggest content for the show, because it's a lot to fill up every week. And we went with this one. And what really caught our attention was zombie foreclosures. And then we did watch the story that ABC ran on Channel 7 that covered this all on July 21st, if you want to look for it. So why don't we start off with Andrea and tell us a little bit about what this is all about. What is a zombie mortgage, and how are you involved with Wanda and Madeline?
Well, I met Wanda through trials of many different campaigns for social justice, housing justice, property tax justice. And she has a woman-to-woman podcast, and she started telling me about this problem that she had with the city that was lingering for 14 years. And Michael, even though Mark Brown and ABC covered this, it is still a problem. It's a serious problem. So we want to take you through what has happened with this, with Wanda just being almost, it's like predatory ordinances from the city hitting her over the head with all these different fines. I'd like to let Maddie introduce herself now and how she got involved.
Hi, Maddie.
Hi, my name's Maddie. I work as an administrative assistant and technical writer with Andrea. The things that come across my desk tend to be a little bit further out from the traditional property tax realm. So stuff that will affect property taxes or affect the community at large, especially in areas that we're looking at. And so Wanda Carter's case came across my desk and I was like, this is very interesting. Let me write about it. So I tagged along to administrative hearings and I recently appeared on Wanda's podcast to talk about, how this relates to larger systemic issues and how we can look at solving the problems and then getting some justice for Wanda.
Wanda, why don't you tell us the story and how you got into this mess and what the zombie mortgage is all about, or the zombie foreclosure?
It's zombie foreclosures, and man, I don't know how I got into it, to be honest. I bought the property in 2004, and in 2008 I went into foreclosure, and it just seems like I was offered to do a deed in lieu of foreclosure by the mortgage company. And so I agreed to do it. And they said, move out in 2 weeks and they would do this deed in lieu of foreclosure. So my husband and I, we moved out and we moved into another place. And then I didn't hear anymore from them. And really, because we were settled in a new place, I just went on with my life. And 3 years later, I decided, since I hadn't heard from them and I was, my bills were over and beyond what I could afford. So I decided to do bankruptcy. And when I did the bankruptcy, the attorney said, don't worry, they would make sure everything was included and I didn't have to worry about identifying all my bills. They do all that for you. And so, but they never told, so we did the bankruptcy, but they never told me that I needed to do anything other than the bankruptcy. They wrote off the first and second mortgage. It was no more mortgage on the property. And so I thought I was done. That's all I had to do. And so I went on with my life. But then, and that was in 2011, about 2013, I started getting fines or these notices from the courts about the property. And I'm study telling them, well, why am I getting these notices? I was ignoring them because I don't own the property. They took it away and I did bankruptcy. So why are you sending me these notices? And so I really didn't pay them any attention. I was ignoring them because they didn't belong to me. So I thought. And so then, I met Anthony Travis, and I was telling him about the problem. My brother and I even went down to City Hall to talk to the City Hall attorneys and to tell them about the situation and why am I still getting all these notices. And the attorney said she was that I was in a catch-22 because she worked for the city and she couldn't tell me anything. She couldn't advise me on anything. So, my brother saying, you're over 65, just walk away. Don't worry about it. Don't go to court. Don't do nothing. Just leave it alone. So, like I said, I was ignoring it up until the fines just started when I did go to court, and they started making me make these payments. And I was doing personal assistant for some elders like myself, and they started taking money from my check. I was like, that's it. Forget it. I don't know what's going on, but I gotta start addressing this because.
When you say you were getting these fines and stuff, this was from the city.
Yes.
Was it over the mortgage, or was the city was fining you for
the yards, for the maintenance of the yards, and they said the building was unsafe. Well, I said, well, it's boarded up, and it's not my building. You need to be going to the mortgage company, but they kept coming to me.
And Michael, they fined her $31,000 to demolish this 1,200 square foot building. Yes. They fined her up to total of $44,300 for trash that's on the lot, of $900 because the lot doesn't have a fence. The sad part about this case, it's just not Wanda. It is prolific throughout Inglewood and Austin. Everywhere you go and you see a vacant lot, that was foreclosed on in 2008 and the 2007 Great Recession that affected Wanda. And for the city to continuously go after her. She has been so far to about 30 hearings.
Yes.
2 years, they didn't even ask her to come to a hearing, 2020, 2019. But then in 2021, she had about 15 hearings that she had to go to. And guess what? Madeline, does she have another hearing to go to?
She does. So the most recent hearing was continued on account of the other council not having enough time to review the evidence. So it was pushed off until the city insisted that they couldn't settle with just one, that they had to settle with both respondents at the same time. So they continued it until November.
Let me ask, what's supposed to happen if a mortgage company or a bank forecloses on you? What are they supposed to do? In other words, you stop paying your mortgage payments, and they take it back. What do they do that they haven't done that created this situation?
So the way a foreclosure process will work is that if the bank files for foreclosure, the judge will start a redemption period during which the owner can either pay off the loan to stop the foreclosure or come to an agreement with the company. If the owner doesn't redeem, the parcel gets scheduled for auction or a sheriff sale, and then the parcel is sold to the highest bidder. The court will confirm the sale, and the sheriff or foreclosure deed will get issued to the buyer. Now, the weird thing about that is, unlike other litigation cases, in mortgage foreclosure litigation, the judgment that gets passed doesn't end the case. There's a lot of other steps that have to be done afterwards before the case comes to a true end with that new deed. Now, in a lot of neighborhoods like Englewood that are distressed urban neighborhoods where home values and conditions have declined, lenders and their mortgage servicing companies don't actually have an incentive to bring foreclosure cases to an end. So they get left in this stagnant state where they become zombie foreclosures, where in cases like Wanda's, a new deed never gets recorded, so it's still in her name. And then the city doesn't have an incentive to kind of intervene or explain how this process works, because they can infinitely fine the property owner based off of neglect and vacancy.
And these lawyers that work for the city, they already have full-time jobs, but they show up and they are these administrative judges. This has happened to Wanda for 14 years straight. They get paid $500 an hour. They have no incentive not to tie this case up and close it out. Wanda is 72 years old, a widow. She's had her grandkids go out to the lot and pick up the trash and mow. She's a remarkable senior, but there are so many other seniors that this predatory, city of Chicago ordinance is just running them through the ringers. There is a hope that maybe we can pass city ordinance and state law to force mortgage companies, banking industry, that if they foreclose on you, they must file a deed that is theirs and that they own within maybe 30 to 50 days. Now, if we try to advocate for that, Michael, the entire title and mortgage industry lobbyists will be on us and come down on us very hard. But we need this change.
Yeah, so how do we change it?
We could advocate that the city council put it up and sponsor the change in ordinance, and that so we don't have to lobby, a lot of these folks, but they'll be lobbied anyway. And then we can pick us friendly housing advocate legislators to sponsor it and say the mortgage industry, when they foreclose within 30 to 40 days, they must file that foreclosure and that deed change.
What are the chances of getting either aldermen, alderwomen, state representatives, et cetera, to take this on? Have you talked to, either the three of you talked to any politicians or public servants, elected officials, about this situation?
Wanda has. Wanda, you
Yeah.
want to tell them?
I talked to Alderman Sawyer about the property because it's in his ward. And he said he would look into it, but I haven't done any follow-up with him. I'm going to have to do the follow-up with him because his looking into it, I don't know what that meant. I don't know what he's done. But yeah, I talked to him, and I've been talking to everybody I can get in front of about the situation because I didn't know what to do. And so basically, he's been the only one that I've talked to.
Well, I know there was in the story that was on Channel 7, ABC, on the 21st of July, there was also another woman who had a similar situation
Yes,
in South Suburb. Uh,
yes.
so how many people do you know of who are in this situation?
Well, let me just say, when I looked at Wanda's area and I looked at a two to three block radius in the heart of Inglewood, there were 12 vacant lots, and all the vacant lots had individual owners on them, their names. They were all foreclosed on between 2007, 2008, 2010. They were all foreclosed on, and I have to assume when we looked at some of the pens, they had a lot of liens on their property and they had a lot of problems. So I think it's prolific. I think that, this goes on and on. It might impact, 3,000 or 4,000 of our most vulnerable community members, those that are in the Black and brown communities that are trying to struggle to keep their first homes. The highest rate of foreclosures are within those communities. So if we were to do, maybe Madeline, a freedom of information request to find out how many of these folks are being chased after by the city of Chicago, it would make another story.
I'm sure it was. And during that time, I found out that there was the Illinois House Bill 4050 predatory lending pilot program going on. And they had targeted or redlined like 10 to 12 communities out of the city of Chicago, and Inglewood was one of those communities where you could not sell or buy property unless you attended some of these classes that they had orchestrated for you to do that, because it was a lot of predatory lending going on during that time.
Yeah, and Michael, just as we have a bill that's in the legislature, it's Senate Bill 3488. It's being sponsored by Senator Emil Jones and Ely Sims. That bill would allow anyone who has problem with being auctioned or a compulsory sale or foreclosure, that can be brought in as evidence to try to lower their property taxes, because the assessor increases the values of these foreclosures. So if you buy for $60,000, you're an African American, you buy your first home for $60,000 because it's a short sale or whatever, then the assessor brings up that value. And so a lot of these homeowners can't even hold on to their property because they didn't realize the property taxes would escalate. It's not quite exactly what we're talking about here on the show, but it is legislation that we're advocating for.
A lot of people who follow Chicago situations know about the contract buyers problem, where mainly African-American people bought homes, and I'm not sure how it worked out, but they lost their homes pretty easily. Is this similar to that?
Yes, and another thing too is, there was this appraisal scheme going on where an African American would have someone come in to appraise her home, and her home would appraise out at like 100,000. And then if they changed the woman and made it look like it was a white-owned homeowner, the appraiser would come in at 190,000. And
Wow.
That is also rampant across the nation. We need more Black appraisers in that field. So there's a lot of hurdles with the housing in the minority communities.
Well, you're going to have to keep us posted on this, because after you win, and I assume that with all the support you're getting, you're going to have some victory and you can fill us in. But what is your next step, Wanda?
Well, I'm working with attorney Mario Reed, and he's going back to court with me on the 1st. And my next step is to allow him to be the professional that he is and to assist me in making sure that I get out of this situation, because the home is not mine. It's gone anyway. They demolished it. So therefore, they ought to let me off the hook and give that responsibility back to the banks.
Well, we're rooting for you.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to when there's some resolution to this, to knowing about it. And
Absolutely.
Andrea, I want to thank you for bringing this to our attention. And I know you have a lot of other ideas of things we should cover on the show. So we'll be in touch.
Thank you. I think there will be a part 2 after November 3rd.
There
Right
you
on.
go. Thank you. Thank you.
Glad
Thank you
to
so
meet
much.
Wanda and Madeline,
you.
and it's good to see you, Andrea. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for having us. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Likewise.
Thanks
Yes.
for giving us
Okay.
a voice.
Thank
You are listening to the Live from the Heartland show, brought to you on WLUW 88.7 WLUW.org on Saturday mornings. And you can get us anytime on youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos. Okay, we'll be right back with more Live from the Heartland here on the left end of the dial. I knew a guy named Jim Shiflett and his wife back in the day, and they have a kid named Shawn. And Shawn is a professor at Columbia College. He's the author of a couple of books. And I'm reading his book, Hey Liberal, which really brings back a lot of memories, because obviously it seems to be based on a lot of things that are recognizable to me. The street names, the high school with a different name, some of the political groups that show up. And it sort of takes place, I think, and you can correct me, but in Lincoln Park area, which back in the late 60s was really a cauldron of cross-cultural, cross-class, cross-ethnic, cross-race, mixing it up. You had Puerto Ricans who were still there before they got forced out. You had Black kids. They both went to school together at St. Michael's High School or at Waller High School. You had the hippies, the politicos, the gentrification set. Good morning to you, Shawn. How are you?
All right, Mike. And before we start, I just want to thank you for having me on your show. It's very kind of you. My dad, who started the Body Politic Theater, he spoke very highly of all you have done for the community. It's funny because the characters are based on you. They get into this little kind of fight or oral argument, but in reality, when I mentioned that I'd seen you, it was at some gallery in South Shore. I ran into you. He said, "Oh, Mike James, he's been at it for a long time. Tell him I said hi." So he has high opinion of you.
So are both your parents passed away?
Yes, they have recently. Yeah,
I liked your dad and your mom a lot, and I have to say your mom was just a very striking person. Very good looking. Let's just say that.
we were hard acts to follow.
Yeah, I would bet. Anyhow, I'm reading the book Hey Liberal, and it really it caught my attention right off, and particularly when a guy named Lewis takes up conducting classical music in a classroom at a high school that's mostly Black, with some Latinos and whites, and there's a lot of fighting. Why don't you give me the overview of the book? Take your time, tell people what it's about, because it's a fun read.
Well, the overview is, if I was to boil it down, is a white kid going to a predominantly Latinx and Black high school at the heart of Lincoln Park before it was an inner city suburb. I don't mean any put down by that, but
sorry, that's a good one.
and how he navigates the political scene and the race. And it's an angry time. It's right after the Martin Luther King riots. And when you're living in the middle of that, you think this is the way it's going to be all the time. But really, it was a pretty fleeting time, both politically and just in terms of the community. And I think your cauldron is the right word, because it's like there's this time when gentrification just starts that no one had what I would call control, dibs on Lincoln Park. There were these competing forces and trying to have coalitions and urban renewal in the middle of it, which was where they started to gentrify the neighborhood. So that's really the setting of the book. And how does he navigate this kid who's actually 13 years old as a freshman? He's pretty young.
Now, you did change the name of the kid from yourself.
Yeah, he's not. I would call my writing autobiographical fiction. And in order, when you're in a situation like that, which is relatively dangerous from day to day, but some good things happen and some funny things happen at the same time, you're just trying to melt into the woodwork. So it makes for a very passive protagonist. So it helps to change the names so you can let this kid get up and, as Faulkner would say, get up and walk on his own. He can't be passive all the time. So I think that was one of the biggest struggles. He can't just be watching everyone else react. He has to, at some point, make things happen. So it helped to have some distance on him. Otherwise, write it first person and do it as a memoir, which might have been very successful. I don't know, but I was more attracted to fiction, where you could get to the greater truth by fictionalizing every once in a while.
Well, how did you get into being a writer?
That's interesting.
That's why I asked it.
Yeah. As a kid, I didn't like to read. I like baseball, and this is a part of his character. I love baseball. I love to be read to. I think I was just lazy. I remember one time my sister and I, Melissa, we were both sick from grade school, and she read me an entire Nancy Drew novel, and I was riveted. Like, it took her one day, but it never really. I took a writing class in high school when I went to my second high school, which was Metro High School.
Metro.
Metro, right? Yeah, and that was a wonderful experience. Very different than, say, Waller High School, which is now called Lincoln Park High. And then I went to Columbia College, straight out of the Chicago public school system, and I was behind in my assignments, and I said, well, what can I write about? And I started to write about Waller, and people were interested in it, and the teacher encouraged me to go on with it, but then I was hooked. I was just hooked. So that was 1975 or 6, and I finished the book 6 years ago. So it took me a long time to get it what I consider right. I'd say decades. And finally, what really kicked in, Mike, is once my father passed away, and there's a character in there, and I call it the body politic. I said, you should be able to get this now. You're older. You're as old as your dad was when this story is happening. And that was a light bulb, that I could have the distance and see the predicaments of the characters and tell the story. And then it wrote itself for that last year or two.
Well, let's just talk for a moment about the body politic, because it was a theater in like 1969 when we started a group called Rising Up Angry, which I think you worked off of. In the book, you call it Rising Up Rage or something.
Right.
And,
I had to come up with
anyhow, I remember your dad was constructing the place then. It was an old bowling alley up above Oxford's pub.
Right.
And we had tables made out of the bowling, later on, I think, piece of the bowling alley. And we rented the space from your dad when we put out the first issue of Rising Up Angry. I got married in January 1970 in the body politic, and it was quite an affair. We had Young Lords, Black Panthers, Rising Up Angry, people about to become weathermen. It was. We had. I remember Jimmy Cartier with a rifle. We're standing our ability, our willingness to fight together after we were married, to make a better world, etc. Tell us about the body politic theater.
Well, he had a non-for-profit called the Community Arts Foundation. So my father was a community activist, but he got engaged in theater through Paul Sills. And
the great Paul Sills, yeah.
I even took when I was a kid, still on the Northwest Side, I took a class with Viola Spolin. And so, I was angry about it, even though it was a great class looking back, and she was very kind to me, but it would take me away from my baseball on Saturdays. So I had the privilege of taking the class directly from Viola. But he wanted to merge the arts with community. And so that's where you would come in, Mike. You weren't a theater company. You were a political organization that he thought was doing good things. And I think you had maybe even a healthcare clinic for a little while.
We did later on, yeah. Like all of the kind of Rainbow Coalition, the Panthers, Young Lords, the Patriots, Rising Up Angry. We ended up having a clinic at the Church of the Holy Covenant at Seminary and Bercy.
That's where my dad brought us, because he was no longer being a minister. So we'd go to the Holy Covenant. That was our church.
They're still active. They got a gay couple minister, such a woman. And I was last there for a Young Lords event of some kind of a thing, but they're still doing it, and the mural is still out there on the wall.
Right.
So, before we go any further, I just want to you to tell us a little bit about Lewis in the book, and if you can, give as much detail as you want, because you've got a couple of white kids in this class with all black kids. There's some tension, and the professor or the teacher, the music teacher, leaves the room telling everyone to listen to classical music. Then what happens?
Well, Lewis is a combination of people. He's probably, in some ways, the most fictional character, but he has his antecedents in real people. So the first person, I remember as a kid, there was a minister in some city, I've never really researched it, I just remember it, who was protesting high-income housing being built in a low-income housing area. And they were doing a sit-in, and the bulldozers were there ready to build and knock down the houses the poor people lived in, and they're going to build upper middle-class houses. And somehow, either the bulldozer driver didn't see this minister, or he missed him because he's high up, and he ran right over him. And so the issue is, why didn't the minister get up? He had a family. And there was this big controversy of, how far do you push things? Do you family over community? And my dad said it really shook up the nonviolent civil rights movement. This would be back in probably 64, 63, maybe. And I just remember going to church and sitting in the front pew where we like to sit, and my friends going, that was a stupid way to die. Man, he didn't even get up. That was just dumb. So that was the argument that was going. And I just remember thinking that, that could have been my dad. He's in the movement. He's going to marches. He's in protests. So that became Lewis's father. So he's in this all-black high school at an angry time in our period. These kids are giving him a hard time, and yet his dad died that way. It was as close as I could get to justifying how he acts, what he talks about, how he's angry, how he uses the N-word, even though he comes from a liberal, progressive family. And then I had a friend who was just, had this really high IQ. It was 154. I had that in the book, and the editor made me take it out, said it was too high. And then later, my friend came out of the woodwork and said, hey, that was me. So the editor made me lower it to 136, which is okay. But he was just a really smart kid. He used to play with his slide rule just for fun. This is before computers, and I was like, God, what are you doing here? And he had letters from places. Another friend, he had letters from Harvard, Yale, saying, if you apply, we will accept you at full scholarship. So just a kid like that, put that into Lewis. There's another kid who liked to steal cars, take him for joyrides. He particularly liked VWs. They were really easy to hotwire. So he'd just go in the neighborhood, and people left their cars unlocked, or he'd jimmy the lock and he'd hotwire it, take it for a trip, down the expressways. One time some kid came up to me and said, man, I was with so-and-so, and he rolled the car on the ramp, and we were like on the expressway. We had to hitchhike home. I thought the cops were going to get us. So I used that scene in the story. I put Simon in the place. And there's other people who all go into this character. My wife, who's a writer, calls it Frankensteining the character. And they're usually the most fun to deal with. So fun. So in some ways, he's biographical. A lot of his parts are when you put him all together like that, he becomes a unique individual, and he takes over the book. It's what usually happens. So he takes Simon under his wing a little bit. You haven't gotten to the most dramatic.
No, I haven't yet. All I remember was the conductor comes in, and the black kids had been yelling at this white kid who was conducting away, just doing the whole thing. And the next thing you know, when the professor comes in, or the teacher, and he's going to go report him to the principal, he jumps out the window and takes off. Yeah. Anyhow, I won't give away any more, and I don't know the rest, but it was pretty good. Now you have another book out, and I'm going to hold it up. It's called Hidden Place, and I don't know anything about this. Why don't you give our listeners, our viewers, a little bit about it, because once they've read this one, they're going to want to go to the next one.
I hope so. All of my, probably because of some of the situations like the one I just described with the minister who got killed, race, even when I was on the Northwest side, it was all white. Race was a big part of my family. My father went down to Selma, Alabama, got arrested. It was actually before some of the other protests were King for the first time in the Selma protest said he wanted Northern clergymen to come down and witness the Jim Crow laws. And so they got thrown in jail. It was all planned. I recently found a film clip of my dad standing in the protest on the courthouse steps. Tall man, so that you have the row of ministers.
Okay.
Shiflett. So it's always been there. It was always in my DNA growing up. That book is about hidden places about Puerto Escondido, which is a small town directly west of Oaxaca, where the hippies used to go because it was so cheap. You'd string up a hammock for like $1 a day and go to these little like huts for, fresh red snapper. But the locals were very poor, a lot of them, and they really didn't like all these long hair people and people, going skinny dipping in their ocean. They were very Catholic. So there was this economically, they wanted them there, but they wanted them to spend their money and get lost quickly. So there's a lot of tension. So I did a lot of what happens when this tension gets out of control between the two cultures, and that's what the book is basically about, and how Roman, who is actually, you could call him part me too, I suppose, but he does a lot of things that I would never dare do, navigates this scene, this escalation between the two cultures that are forced together by economics.
When I was trying to do my research on you, I read that, let me read it. In 2018, he performed his oral story performance, How My Yo-Yo Could Have Gotten Me Killed. And in 2019, you performed Oriole Park, From White America to Multicultural America. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about your performances and where do you do these kind of things? I like the idea of, getting up there in front of people and telling stories and stuff. Is that what it is?
It is. You get up, you practice it. Some people write it out. I usually just go by notes and I try to get it to where I can orally do it, so that without looking at, I'm not a really good memorizer. So I just I hit my point. So every time I tell how my yo-yo almost got me killed, it's a little different each time. But it's basically, I was I'm in front of an audience doing this, and I have my yo-yo, special yo-yo. It could do a lot of around the worlds. It has ball bearings. It's a really, professional yo-yo. And I was at a party, and this is years later. I mean, it's been gentrified, Old Town. And I was bored. I mean, they were playing all, punk rock music, and I was still back with, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and all the bands from the 60s. It's when you start to realize you're no longer cool. And so I went on the front porch and I was just playing with my yo-yo. I brought my yo-yo to this party. My wife at the time was a little embarrassed. And some guys were walking down the street and they go, "Look at that guy. He's got a yo-yo. Oh, he's a grown man. What's he doing with his yo-yo?" And I had a few drinks and they're just jawing nicely. And then something just snapped. And I said, "You got a problem with my yo-yo?" And we were off to the races. And a lot of that was things I had picked up at Waller High School. There's a certain line you don't cross. You're questioning me? What business is this of yours? So I turned into, which is funny because I'm a totally middle-class kid, but it's just how you present yourself. And it's how he almost gets into a fight and they happen to be Latino. And then he realizes this is really stupid. I'm already teaching college at a young age and how they get out of this predicament. But nobody wants to fight over a yo-yo. But there's that moment where it crosses the line and you get mercurial as to what and drinks help. So I told it to my class once at Columbia and they said, "Oh, you got to perform that." So that's what I did.
Well, when you talk about how the story changes each time you do it, I'm reminded of my own dad who used to tell me a story about Pecos Pete howling at the moon and that kind of thing. And I'd ask him to do it and it would always change. I said, that's not the way it goes. Anyhow, so you're teaching at Columbia, and you're teaching creative writing, I think. Tell me what's the essence of the class? As someone who, I do my share of writing, and I'm actually working on a book about the Heartland Cafe with my longtime friend, Katie Hogan. I'm always curious about techniques for writing or advice. I'll ask people like Dan O'Brien, who writes novels and raises buffalo. I say, when do you write? And he says, I like to get up real early in the morning and do my writing. What advice do you have to writers as a professor of writing yourself?
Well, I think it's always a struggle to find your own voice. And how do you do that? And a lot of times I don't think it's intentional, but a lot of times we come out of the educational system and it's been beat out of us a little bit. So what I try to do in class with my students is allow them to bring who they are, what their culture is, what their sexuality is, their gender, all those things. And just the way they slid out of the womb, there's certain things we don't even know where they came from, right? Into the classroom so that they can tell those stories. So a lot of it in a beginning class is really setting up a safe space that they can go to the story that is important to them. So there's a lot of ways to do that. It's in what you read out loud as examples. It's how you identify when their writing is stronger. It's almost, I can't tell you how many times someone will do a session on journals and they'll read from their journals, and you'll read one round from everyone, and it's what I would call safe writing. There's nothing controversial in it. There's nothing really deep in it. I said, now read the journal entry you almost read, but decided not to, and it's always better. I said, well, why did you make that decision? They go, I don't know. This one was a little bit, so we have learned to not respect our voice. So a lot of teaching, especially or to feel it's inferior in some way. And this goes, again, across cultures. So it's an ongoing process. That's what you're bringing out, especially in a beginning class. There's a lot of different ways. Yeah, that's a big question. I like to write in the mornings, but now that when I teach, I don't have time in the mornings, so now I write on the weekends. When I was single and had no kids and everything of that sort, I would get up in the morning and I would write. If I had waited to the afternoon, it was too late. If I was on a roll and been writing for say 10 days in a row, I could write anytime. I think 4 hours is about the top of after that, I'm just wasting time and my battery is depleted. So
my goal is to write more and to stop watching every White Sox and Bulls game.
Yeah. So
I get more time to do stuff. I mean, I do look at the computer, make notes, that kind of stuff, but I'm sucked into these baseball games, basically.
We all have those things, Mike, that we get sucked in. Go back to what separates you, Mike, from people who just say, I want to be a writer is you get sucked in, but you go back to it. You might even feel guilty about it, but you go back to it. And that's the discipline. That's not talent. That's just doggedness. I think I've heard so many, fairly famous writers say, I'm just dogged. I'm not more talented. I just don't give up. That's what you're doing. That's what you're describing.
What's your sense of your students these days? I've been teaching at DePaul now. I used to teach at Columbia. I taught a class called Organizing for Social Change, which led to the Heartland Cafe way, way back.
I remember.
And now I'm teaching at DePaul. And over the last 8 years, the kids have been sharper coming in each year and more political and more progressive. And then yesterday, I started my first class, and I'm not so sure if there's a shift. What's your sense of where the young people are at these days? Because you teach more than I do.
For your observation about how it does shift, you see it so much more, how quick it is from year to year, or such like you're in a different America. And that's one of the advantages of teaching college. I think you see it before most people see it. The pandemic was just an incredible impact on my students. So last year, I was getting students who were online in high school. They were just on, and they were just as talented, but trying to get them to talk a year after they'd gone through a year or two of of Zoom classes was almost pulling teeth. They just, you want what? What do you know? And finally, once I was like really exhausted trying to. And once they said, "Wait a second, no, we do like you. I mean, we enjoy what we're doing here." And then they started to mother me a little bit. I thought it was funny that they were fine. They were just really inhibited. This year, less so. They're talking more. So they'd already gone their senior year in high school. They'd gone back to the class. So it can change that fast. I think at Columbia, we have many more LGBTQ students than we had in the past. If I asked for their pronouns, I might have 4 or 5, sometimes 6 people who use they or the pronoun I wasn't expecting. And so we're trying to, be respectful and use the correct pronouns and let everyone have their space in the classroom too. But I would say that they're not more talented than they were back when you were at Columbia. They're just different. They're reflecting as the generation before me would reflect that they never had TV, and my generation reflected TV. This generation is social media and computers and all those things.
They're sharp.
They're sharp, and they're taking me under their wing if I can't quite get Canvas, where they put up all their modules for their classes correct. So I would say it's just as enjoyable. It just changes. It's a vast improvement as far as being able to present themselves just from last year to this year.
Well, Shawn Shiflett, author of a couple of books, professor at Columbia, writer and novelist. What are you working on now, and what are you planning to work on?
Okay, I'm working on oral histories, much like Studs Terkel did. The theme is race. I just went back to that. So I have a friend.
It's the bottom line, race, the race in America. I mean, until we deal with race, we're not going to get very far.
I agree, Mike. So first one was from a friend of mine who grew up in, who was Japanese American, who grew up in Lincoln Park with me. And I had no idea growing up that his parents had been at the camps, the relocation camps for Japanese during World War II. And just slowly that's been coming out a lot more lately. So I interviewed him, what that was like. What was it like? And we all loved Ted. So I was like, oh, what's the problem here? Well, he went to Wayne High School to avoid Waller High School, and of course got in trouble during the Vietnam War because anyone Asian was Asian. They just didn't matter where you were from. So that was the first interview. And then I took a woman who lives in Beverly, what that's like to raise her black sons in Beverly, and she talked about the encounters with the police and how it happens and how she still needs the police, but this is what, she would call the police station and say, "Why are you hassling my son? Because he's on a bicycle. He lives here." And what that was like, and grew up in Gary, saw Gary fall apart from drugs and things of that sort. But there used to be a really enclave of upper middle class and middle class, well-to-do working class black community. It was someplace that blacks in Chicago would move up. That was news to me. And then the last one I'm working on is a former Black Panther, James Elder. I just about finished this now, and he was knew Fred Hampton very well since he was 15, and he would go down to Georgia to be with his family in the summer. All this migration of blacks in Chicago is mostly from Mississippi, but he went to Georgia, and what it was like to visit his grandmother, who was the result of a rape early on from the white landowners. So, and what it was like to go down there, and it gets into a situation that's very similar to Emmett Till, which would be about 2 or 3 years after Emmett Till's murder. So that was, and really gets into how he became a Black Panther. So I'm finding out something with every recording I do, and then it's my job to find the narrative arc to what they're saying, because they'll shoot off in all kinds of directions when they're talking to you. It's a rewarding experience, and it gets it off of my experience with race, and I learn something with each one I do.
Well, Shawn Shiflett, this has really been good, and I'm looking forward to finishing Hey Liberal,
Okay.
and I'm going to read Hidden Place, and I'm looking forward to your other writings and to see you perform your short story someday. And let's you and I get together for a cup of coffee or a drink or a toke. And it's good to have you. I do appreciate you coming on.
I want to just say something about you, Mike. It's good to reconnect. You never knew me. I would just watch you. I was that 13-year-old kid. It's a long time, and there's and the community in Chicago is better off from you. I run into people who you talked to as kids and knew and helped and mentored, and I appreciate what you've done for the community.
Well, I appreciate hearing that, and I'm going to keep on doing my photography, my writing, doing a little talking, and I'm going to make sure I keep going to the Y in that pool, walking a little bit, and do a few weights because I'm getting up there.
All right.
Okay, we'll see you soon. Thanks again.
Thank you. Have a good day.
See you, brother. Okay, everybody, you've been listening to the Live from the Heartland show for the week of the 10th of September. And I'm going to remind you that today, if you're listening to the show on the radio or streaming it on Saturday morning, later today is Maria Haddon's rally on Glenwood Avenue in Rogers Park. And a little bit later today, a memorial for our longtime friend, David Moberg. And we're also very sorry that Pat Gleason has passed away. So keep doing good in the world. The world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do. I want to thank Emilio Davis for being here with me and making this show possible so it can get out. I want to thank the other people in our little group, Katie Hogan and Tom Clark and Lynn Orman. And that's it for today. You have a great week. Do good in the world. The world needs all the good that we all do. And there's a lot to be done and a lot to pay attention to. All power to the people. See you next week.